Billions of dollars vanished into thin air. 50,000 jobs left hanging by a thread. India's beloved tech giant, Satyam, went from a rising star to a financial black hole practically overnight. And at the heart of it all was just one man. A man who built a billion-dollar empire with lies and confessed it in a single letter. For years he was admired and celebrated as a visionary until it all came crashing down and he found himself trading boardrooms for a prison cell. So where did it all go wrong? How did one man pull off a decade-long con without getting caught? And how did a single confession bring it all crashing down? Stick around because this story only gets crazier. Welcome to Silk Road Heist, where we expose the biggest financial lies and forgotten scandals across Asia. In this episode, we uncover how one of India's most trusted tech companies became the country's biggest corporate fraud. A story of deception, fake billions, and the fall of a man once hailed as a visionary. In 1987, two brothers, Ramalinga Raju and B. Rama Raju, launched Satyam Computer Services in Hyderabad, India. Ironically, the name Satyam meant truth in Sanskrit, but what followed was anything but. Satyam started small with just 20 employees, offering IT and business process outsourcing, or BPO, services across various industries, including healthcare, telecom, finance, and automotive. As India's IT industry took off, Satyam grew right along with it. By 2003, the company had over 13,000 technical associates serving 300 customers worldwide. It was no longer just another IT firm. It had grown to become India's fourth largest software company. The company's global expansion was just as rapid. Satyam set up offices in many countries, working with nearly 500 clients, including more than 150 Fortune 500 companies. Development centers popped up across the US, the UK, the UAE, Canada, Hungary, China, Singapore, Japan, Malaysia, Australia, and of course, India. At its peak, Satyam was operating in more than 60 countries and had over 50,000 employees. Financially, Satyam was soaring. It went public on the Bombay Stock Exchange in 1991, and its big break came when it landed Deere & Co. as its first Fortune 500 client. Between 2003 and 2008, revenue skyrocketed from $467 million to $2.1 billion, a 35% annual growth rate. With this success came recognition. The company racked up awards for corporate governance and accountability. It won the Golden Peacock Award for Best Governed Company in 2007 and 2008. The company was also listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which was a massive milestone for an Indian IT firm. Ramalinga Raju himself was named Entrepreneur of the Year in 2007 by Ernst & Young. During this time, he wasn't just respected, he was greatly admired. He was seen as a pioneer in India's IT sector, a leader who had put his company on the global map. Everything about his company screamed success, but soon the truth would come crashing down. At first glance, Satyam Computer Services looked like a model company, booming revenues, prestigious clients, and industry accolades. But behind the scenes, Ramalinga Raju was pulling off one of the biggest corporate frauds India had ever seen. It all started in April 1999. Raju, along with his brother and the global head of internal audit, began falsifying the company's financial records. They inflated revenues, conjured profits out of thin air, and fed the illusion of unstoppable success. With every falsified record, Satyam's reputation soared higher, but so did the weight of its deception. One of the biggest tricks up Raju's sleeve was inflating cash and bank balances. He personally created fake bank statements on his own computer, making it look like Satyam had up to $1.47 billion in assets that simply didn't exist. By September 30, 2008, the company falsified reported having $1.1 billion in cash, when the real figure was just $61 million. This kind of deception wasn't just limited to cash, it extended to earnings too. Satyam routinely overstated its income, reporting profits that were nearly 97% higher than actual figures. Investors and analysts believed Satyam was thriving, but in reality, the company was balancing on a financial house of cards. To keep up appearances, Satyam fabricated thousands of fake invoices and created non-existent customers to inflate revenue figures. Over 7,000 fake invoices were added to the system to make it seem like the company was doing far more business than it actually was. But Raju didn't stop there. He also generated around 6,000 fake salary accounts, allowing him to siphon off $3 million every month in salaries, supposedly paid to ghost employees. Satyam also underreported its liabilities by $253.38 million, making the company's financial position look far healthier than it was. Meanwhile, the global head of internal audit forged board resolutions and even illegally obtained loans under false pretenses. To top it all off, Raju ensured that the money raised through American Depository Receipts, ADRs, in the US never made it to the balance sheet. The fraud was so sophisticated that Satyam even used its own enterprise resource planning system to manipulate financial records and avoid detection by traditional accounting software. However, Raju's luck finally ran out when he made his most daring and disastrous attempt to keep covering his tracks. In 2008, he tried to acquire Mehta's Infrastructure and Mehta's Properties, companies owned by his family, for $1.6 billion. The idea was to use the fictitious cash on Satyam's books to buy real assets, making the fraudulent profits look legitimate. But investors saw through it and fiercely opposed the idea. With no way out, Raju had no choice but to come clean. In January 2009, he wrote a letter to the company's board, confessing to massive financial fraud and misconduct. It wasn't so much a confession as it was an acknowledgement that everything was falling apart. By the time his words hit the boardroom table, the damage was irreversible. Billions had vanished, trust was in shambles, and the once celebrated empire was now crumbling under the weight of its own lies. As the walls closed in, it became clear that the fraud wasn't just about covering up financials, it was driven by much deeper motivations. At the heart of it all was plain old greed. Ramalinga Raju and his associates were chasing money, power, and prestige. Satyam's incredible rise made them industry giants. By keeping up that fake image meant they had to constantly twist the truth. Raju was determined to keep Satyam at the top of India's IT world, even if it meant pretending everything was perfect, no matter the reality. Meeting expectations became another powerful motivator. Investors, analysts, and shareholders all demanded consistent, impressive results. The pressure to deliver quarter after quarter drove Raju to rig the finances, inflating revenue and profits to make Satyam look far more successful than it really was. His own words revealed the trap he had fallen into. He was riding a tiger, not knowing how to get off without being eaten. The fraud snowballed, and as the gap between real and reported profits widened, the only way forward was to keep the lies going. There was also the constant fear of exposure. External auditors would tear through Satyam's books, expose the lies, and bring everything crashing down. His only play was to keep the scam alive, inflate earnings, fake stability, and keep investors fooled for as long as possible. Beyond the financial motives, Satyam's case exposed a deeper issue: corporate ethics, or rather, the lack of them. The top management's focus on short-term success overshadowed any sense of accountability. Ethical standards took a backseat as the company prioritized stock prices and market perception over integrity. Even tax benefits played a small role. By inflating revenue, Satyam could manipulate its tax liabilities while projecting an image of financial strength. In the end, it wasn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about a culture of deception that put greed over honesty. And if that sounds familiar, It's because Satyam's collapse had all the hallmarks of another infamous corporate catastrophe, Enron. Different continents, different players, but the same reckless ambition, the same deception, and ultimately, the same inevitable collapse. Both companies cooked their books for years, inflating profits and masking financial rot until the truth finally came out. Just like Enron, Satyam's fraudulent numbers weren't just about deception. They were about keeping up appearances, maintaining stock prices, and securing investor confidence, until it all unraveled. When each fraud came to light, both companies fell apart fast. Enron's bankruptcy in 2001 wiped out thousands of jobs and retirement savings, shaking trust in corporate America. The fallout was so severe that it led to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, a law that tightened financial regulations to prevent similar scandals. In India, Satyam's collapse exposed major weaknesses in corporate oversight, pushing regulators to strengthen Securities and Exchange Board of India or SEBI rules to keep companies more accountable. While they happened in different countries, both scandals forced big changes in how businesses report their finances. If Satyam was India's Enron, then PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC was its Arthur Andersen, the auditing firm that should have caught the Enron scam, but didn't. After all, an accounting scam of this scale didn't just go unnoticed. Someone has to sign off on it. And for nearly a decade, PwC did exactly that, rubber stamping Satyam's books while billions in fake assets sat hidden in plain sight. One of the biggest red flags was Satyam's claim to have over $1 billion sitting in non-interest-bearing bonds. That alone should have raised eyebrows. What company leaves that kind of money untouched instead of putting it to work? But instead of investigating, PwC simply took Satyam's word for it. Even worse, they never independently verified the bank balances. A quick confirmation with the banks could have shattered the illusion years earlier. But the audits kept coming, and PwC kept collecting fees. When the fraud unraveled, PwC's response was weak at best. First, they hid behind client confidentiality. Then they insisted they had just followed standard auditing practices. But regulators weren't buying it. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or PCAOB, hit PwC India with a record $7.5 million fine, and India's SEBI initially banned them from auditing listed companies. PwC's failure to catch the fraud left Satyam's house of cards standing far too long than it should have. But when the cracks finally started showing, it wasn't the auditors or regulators who blew the whistle. It was an anonymous insider. In December 2008, someone using the name Jose Abraham sent an email that sent everything in motion. Claiming to be a former senior executive, this whistleblower reached out to Krishnaji Palepu, an independent director at Satyam. The message was clear. Satyam had no liquid assets, the supposed cash reserves were non-existent, and a quick check with the company's banks would expose the entire fraud. The timing was no coincidence. Just a day before, the controversial plan to acquire Mitas Infra and Mitas Properties had fallen apart under investor backlash. With the pressure mounting, Palepu wasted no time forwarding the email to other board members and even Satyam's auditors. But a copy also landed in Ramalinga Raju's inbox, and he soon realized that the walls were closing in. With the fraud teetering on the edge of exposure, Raju had only one move left. That's when he came clean in the letter to Satyam's board, admitting that the Mitas acquisition was his last-ditch effort to cover up the fraud with real assets before everything fell apart. But there was no escaping now. Indian authorities moved swiftly, arresting Raju, his brother, CFO Srinivas Vadlamani, the company's head of internal audit, and even auditors from PwC. The charges were criminal conspiracy, breach of trust, and forgery. After years of legal battles, the verdict finally came in April 2015. Raju and 9 others were found guilty, 7 years in prison, and an $800,000 fine. From the moment Ramalinga Raju's confession had gone public, Satyam's fate took a nosedive. Investors scrambled to pull out, clients cut ties, and the entire Indian stock market felt the tremors. Satyam's stock, which had once soared as high as 544 rupees in 2008, came crashing down to a mere 11.5 rupees by January 10, 2009. On the New York Stock Exchange, it was the same story. Shares that had peaked at $29.10 were now worth less than $2. In a matter of weeks, billions vanished, leaving shareholders with nothing but losses and outrage. It wasn't just about one company's collapse. It was a hit to India's reputation in the global market. Everyone was comparing it to Enron, and trust in the country's IT sector started to shake. The benchmark Sensex index took a hit, dropping over 5% as nervous investors started questioning just how deep the rot went. Some of Satyam's biggest business partners weren't willing to take any risks. Merrill Lynch cut ties immediately. Credit Suisse stopped covering Satyam altogether. Even the World Bank, which had already been wary of the company's dealings, officially banned Satyam from doing business with them for 8 years. As the dust settled, one name kept coming up: PricewaterhouseCoopers, Satyam's auditors. If a fraud of this scale had gone undetected for nearly a decade, what did that say about PwC's other clients? Investors started looking at every company audited by PwC with suspicion. Around 100 of them saw their stock prices fall, anywhere from 5 to 15% in the wake of the scandal. As if that wasn't enough, Satyam lost every award it had ever won for corporate governance. The Golden Peacock Award was gone. Ramalinga Raju's Earnest and Young Entrepreneur of the Year award was revoked. It was a complete reckoning. With Satyam on the brink of total collapse, the Indian government had no choice but to step in. Letting the company fail would have been disastrous, not just for its 50,000 employees, but for India's entire corporate sector. A new board of directors was appointed, tasked with stabilizing the company and finding a buyer. The goal was clear: Satyam had to be sold within 100 days. Investment firms like Goldman Sachs and Avendus Capital were brought in to speed up the process. While SEBI assigned a retired Supreme Court justice to oversee the sale, ensuring everything was done transparently. By mid-March 2009, the bidding war began. Several major IT firms showed interest, but in the end, Tech Mahindra came out on top. On April 13th, they sealed the deal, purchasing Satyam for $1.13 per share, which was less than a third of its pre-scandal value. It was a bargain, but it also saved thousands of jobs. To distance the company from its tainted past, Tech Mahindra rebranded it as Mahindra Satyam. Then in 2013, the final chapter of the Satyam saga was written when Mahindra Satyam merged completely with Tech Mahindra. At the end of the day, Satyam wasn't just one guy pulling a fast one. It was an entire system looking the other way. A billion-dollar mirage, rubber-stamped by auditors, ignored by regulators, and swallowed whole by investors who had no clue they were buying into a fantasy. 50,000 jobs were barely rescued. Billions were gone overnight. Raju did his time, but how many more Satyams could be out there? Corporate fraud doesn't just vanish. It slips into something new, waiting for the next big scandal to blow up. And when it does, the cycle repeats. The outrage fades, and the system carries on, unchanged. A broken company can be patched up, rebranded, or bailed out. But the real question is, who's fixing the system that keeps letting this happen?